You probably think you know why we go to space. Rockets, astronauts, moon landings, billionaires with shiny spaceships. But that's just the loud version. The real story of space exploration has always been quiet, slow, full of failures and forgotten projects, built one careful piece at a time. And little by little, what started as exploration became business. This isn't just a story about rockets. It's a story about how money followed dreams, and how dreams turned into profits. And by the end of this, you might find yourself wondering, what's really waiting for us up there? Exploration or expansion? And here's the curious part. I'm telling you this while you're probably laying there, maybe half tired, maybe just hoping this helps you drift off. And that's what makes these stories different. They don't move fast, they don't push, they just drift with you, slow, soft, almost boring on purpose. But not boring because of the ideas, boring because that's how you really feel the story. That's why I make these videos like this. Calm, quiet, steady. The kind of thing people comment on later, saying they woke up thinking about the weird mix of astronauts and billionaires, wondering how space turned into business. Funny what sticks, isn't it? All right, let's drift into it now. This isn't just about rockets. It's a setup. Picture the sky not as an inviting expanse of wonder, but as a vast, silent battlefield waiting to be claimed. The dreamers and visionaries, the Tsiolkovskys, the Oberths, the Goddards, had whispered of cosmic possibilities for decades, sketching equations for escape velocity on chalkboards in dusty studies, launching modest, sputtering, experimental rockets into empty fields, their eyes fixed on celestial bodies. But it wasn't wonder, or even pure scientific curiosity, that finally punched humanity's ticket off the planet. It was fear, cold, calculated, geopolitical terror. The asterisk dawn of space exploration didn't begin with telescopes pointed hopefully at Mars. It began with captured Nazi V-2 blueprints laid out on military drafting tables, the acrid smell of cordite still clinging to the wreckage of Europe, and the suffocating tension of the Cold War settling like radioactive dust over a divided world. Space, in its infancy, was not a frontier. It was the ultimate high ground, a domain where intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, could arc silently over the pole, delivering nuclear fire in minutes, not hours. The rocket, that vehicle of imagined lunar voyages, was first and foremost a weapon of unimaginable destruction, its development driven not by universities, but by the urgent, paranoid needs of superpower survival. The wonder came later, almost as an afterthought, a useful propaganda veneer slapped onto the gleaming, terrifying body of a missile. Into this charged atmosphere stepped NASA's early days, a peculiar blend of high-stakes military urgency and the quiet, methodical chaos of an enormous engineering workshop. Forget the polished mission control of popular imagination. Picture instead cavernous hangars smelling of machine oil, ozone, and stale coffee. Rooms dominated not by sleek computer consoles, but by towering chalkboards groaning under the weight of half-theorized differential equations, trigonometric functions, mapping orbital trajectories, and stress calculations for metal skins that had never faced the vacuum. The men, and they were almost all men who populated these spaces, weren't swashbuckling test pilots yet. They were engineers with bad haircuts, short-backed can sides, thick glasses sliding down noses, shirt pockets bulging with slide rules and mechanical pencils. They wore short-sleeved white shirts, thin black ties, and expressions of profound, weary concentration. They spoke in acronyms thick enough to choke on LVDC, IU, SIVB, and argued ferociously over gimbal limits, cryogenic fuel slosh, and the bewildering mathematics of re-entry heating. They chain-smoked over drafting, tables squinting at blueprints lit by harsh fluorescent lights, their hands stained with grease and ink. They built intricate models out of balsa wood and glue, tested components in brutal vacuum chambers that screamed like banshees, and ran simulations on room-sized computers with less processing power than a modern toaster, feeding them punch cards one by one. It was a world of slide rules clacking, teletypes chattering, and the constant, underlying hum of high-voltage transformers. A world where theoretical physics collided head-on with the gritty reality of metallurgy, plumbing, and electrical systems that absolutely, positively could not fail. The pressure was immense, the hours brutal, the goal achieving orbital velocity, docking, surviving re-entry, seemingly impossible. Yet there was a strange, intense camaraderie born of shared, almost absurd ambition and the quiet terror of what failure meant, not just for the mission, but in the shadow of the mushroom cloud. The decision to go to the moon, arguably humanity's greatest peacetime adventure, wasn't born from a sudden surge of exploratory zeal or a collective yearning to touch another world. It emerged instead from the strange, bureaucratic machinery of Cold War one-upmanship. After the Soviet Union's relentless series of space firsts, Sputniks, haunting beep beep beep, Laika the dog, sacrificed in orbit, then Yuri Gagarin's triumphant, single orbit that made him the first human in space, the United States felt humiliated, its technological supremacy publicly questioned. President John F. Kennedy needed a win, not just a win, but an unambiguous, staggering demonstration of American prowess that would eclipse Soviet achievements and restore faith in the free world. The moon was chosen not because it was easy, as Kennedy famously and somewhat disingenuously claimed, but because it was hard, it was audacious, it was visible, and crucially, it seemed just barely within the realm of the technologically conceivable within a decade, a time frame chosen for political, not engineering, reasons. The decision process involved high-level committees, the infamous GOAT Committee, presentations by cautious NASA administrators like James Webb, an intense debate within the White House and Congress. It was a flex, pure and simple, a multi-billion-dollar geopolitical statement, written not in diplomatic notes, but in rocket exhaust and lunar trajectories. The Apollo program was conceived in the language of national prestige and Cold War competition, its funding secured by fear of Soviet dominance, its ultimate justification less about science and more about demonstrating for all the world to see whose system, whose rockets, whose engineers, whose slide rules was superior. The moon was a flagpole waiting for a flag. While astronauts trained and missions were planned, a vast, largely invisible ecosystem hummed to life. An ecosystem where companies quietly got rich, building parts for government rockets no one remembers. The colossal scale of Apollo demanded industrial mobilization unseen since World War II. It wasn't just the giants like North American Aviation building the command service module. often shoddily at first, Grumman the intricate, bug-like, lunar module, or bowing the monstrous Saturn V first stage. It was thousands of subcontractors scattered across every industrial belt in America, each feeding a tiny piece into the behemoth. Picture unassuming factories in anonymous Midwestern towns, their parking lots filled with workers' cars under the sodium glare of streetlights. Inside, lathes wind, shaping Inconel alloy into fittings that would carry cryogenic hydrogen. Women in hairnets meticulously soldered miles of wiring harnesses destined for instrument panels. Chemists in lab coats tested batches of ablative heat shield material. Metallurgists scrutinized the grain structure of forged engine nozzles. Companies like Rocketdyne, the mighty F1 and J2 engines, Delco guidance systems, Hamilton standard spacesuits, and Thiokol solid rocket boosters became household names only within the industry. They mastered esoteric technologies under punishing deadlines and brutal NASA oversight. Their profit margins secured by cost-plus contracts that rewarded spending, not necessarily efficiency. They built gyroscopes the size of washing machines, fuel tanks as large as houses, guidance computers that filled entire rooms yet possessed less memory than a digital watch. These weren't consumer products. They were bespoke, one-off masterpieces of engineering, often used once and then discarded into the ocean or left on the lunar surface. The wealth generated was immense, flowing not just to shareholders but into entire communities, building schools, roads, and suburban sprawl around Cape Canaveral, Huntsville, and Houston. It was an industrial golden age funded by Cold War anxiety and lunar ambition, creating fortunes and legacies in the manufacture of objects destined for obsolescence or oblivion almost as soon as they were perfected, their serial numbers forgotten, their engineering triumphs known only to the specialists. Who built them? Then came Apollo 11, July 1969. The world held its breath. Armstrong's boot touched dust. One small step echoed across the globe. It was a moment of pure, undiluted triumph, a staggering feat of engineering, courage, and organization. The promise was fulfilled, the flex executed perfectly, the photos were breathtaking, the rocks scientifically priceless. And then something peculiar happened. Success, but then boredom. Apollo 12 went, then 14, 15, 16, 17. Each mission more sophisticated than the last, achieving more science, driving the lunar rover farther. Yet public fascination waned. Rapidly after that first landing, the novelty wore thin. The Vietnam War raged, social unrest simmered at home, economic worries mounted. The sheer repetitive difficulty of it all became apparent. The risks remained terrifyingly high. Apollo 13's near disaster, a stark reminder, the cost astronomical. The television networks cut away from live moonwalks for soap operas. The grand narrative of conquest gave way to the grinding reality of geology field trips conducted 240,000 miles away. The question shifted subtly from "can we?" to "why are we still spending this much?" The existential Cold War imperative that birthed Apollo had faded. The Soviets, while achieving robotic, lunar feats, never mounted a serious manned challenge. Without that driving geopolitical fear, the political will to sustain such an enormous, purely symbolic effort evaporated. Apollo 17 left the moon in December 1972. No human has returned since. The grandest adventure ended not with a bang, but with a budgetary whimper. Its magnificent hardware, the remaining Saturn verses, becoming museum pieces before they ever flew. The truth that settled in the aftermath. The quiet lesson learned by those who remained in the sprawling NASA centers and the now anxious aerospace factories was a sobering one. Space was expensive, hard, and mostly paperwork. The romance of the rocket, the allure of the void, was constantly ground down by the sheer, unglamorous weight of bureaucracy. Beyond the physics and the engineering lay an Everest of administrative friction. Every component, every procedure, every line of code required meticulous documentation. Failure mode effects analyzes FMEAs stacked higher than the rockets themselves. Configuration control boards met endlessly to debate the slightest change to a valve or a circuit. Safety reviews dissected every conceivable fault path. Procurement regulations dictated sourcing. Congressional committees scrutinized budgets line by line. Auditors crawled through facilities. Interagency rivalries, Air Force versus NASA, simmered. International partnerships, like the nascent Apollo-Soyuz test project, introduced layers of diplomatic and technical complexity. Environmental impact statements grew thicker than phone books. The act of getting permission to try something often consumed more time and energy than the actual doing. The brilliant engineers, the ones who could visualize orbital mechanics in their heads, now spent hours filling out forms, justifying expenditures, attending meetings about meetings, wrestling with the soul-crushing inertia of large organizations, funded by public money and accountable to countless masters. The dream of slipping Earth's surly bonds was perpetually tethered to the mundane realities of budget cycles, political horse trading, risk aversion codified into paralyzing procedure, and the endless, essential, mind-numbing work of ensuring that a project costing billions and carrying human lives didn't fail because of a 2-cent washer or a misread line in a procedure manual. The final frontier, it turned out, was guarded not by aliens or cosmic radiation, but by filing cabinets, compliance officers, and the suffocating, necessary weight of accountability. The giant leap for mankind had required not just courage and genius, but an ocean of ink, a mountain of paper, and the quiet, uncelebrated endurance of countless souls pushing that paper through the labyrinth. The rockets roared, but the system that built them advanced at the pace of a triplicate form. The roar of the Saturn V faded into memory, a thunderclap replaced by a persistent, almost imperceptible hum. The flags planted, the heroes paraded, the ticker tape swept away. The public gaze, ever restless, flickered elsewhere towards Watergate. Disco, stagflation, the grinding gears of a changing world. The bright, burning drama of Apollo condensed into a nostalgic afterglow. A few grainy photographs on a classroom wall, but above, far above the distracted Earth, in the silent, airless black, something profound was happening. Asterisk, asterisk, the public stopped paying attention, but space quietly kept growing. Asterisk, asterisk, not with the heart-stopping leaps of moonwalks, but with the steady, the incremental pulse of orbital mechanics, the worry of gyroscopes, the silent dance of microwaves and radio waves. It was an era of settling in, of building infrastructure, of turning the extravagant gamble of rocketry into something resembling a utility, a background service, as essential and unremarkable as the electrical grid humming behind the walls. The age of spectacle was over. The age of the persistent, profitable presence had begun. The vanguard of this quiet conquest wasn't astronauts in pressure suits, but unblinking, electronic eyes and tireless repeaters perched on an invisible shelf. 22,236 miles high, communication satellites, geostationary. It sounded technical, dull even. A satellite parked over the equator, moving at the exact speed of the Earth's rotation, appearing permanently fixed in the sky like a strange, artificial star. To the public, it was just the satellite dish, sprouting on rooftops in the 1970s and 80s, promising clearer TV reception, maybe a few exotic channels. But beneath that mundane surface churned an economic revolution. Companies like Comsat, Intelsat, a consortium of nations, and later private players like Hughes and GE Aerospace mastered the art of launching these complex machines, intricate bundles of transponders, solar panels, and delicate antennae, and selling their invisible capacity. They weren't selling adventure. They were selling bandwidth, minutes of international phone calls that no longer crackled across undersea cables, but zipped instantaneously through the vacuum. Live television broadcasts beamed across continents, shrinking the world in real time, turning global events into shared living room experiences. Data streams for banks, corporations, news agencies, flowing at the speed of light over national borders. It was infrastructure built in the sky, a nervous system woven from microwaves, generating billions while sounding boring. The profits weren't flaunted like moonshot triumphs. They were steady, reliable, reported in quarterly earnings statements, funding dividends and corporate jets. The satellites themselves became anonymous constellations, known only by alphanumeric designations: Intelsat 601, Galaxy 11, their operational success measured by uptime percentages and signal clarity, their failures causing temporary disruptions in stock trades or soap operas, quickly fixed or replaced. They were the unglamorous workhorses, the profitable foundation upon which globalized business and instant media truly rested. Their success defined by their very invisibility, their quiet, humming efficiency. While the Comsats minted money in the high frontier, closer to Earth, a different kind of monument was taking shape, not through the decisive thrust of a single mighty rocket, but through the agonizingly slow accretion of modules, trusses, and solar arrays. The International Space Station, conceived in the thawing twilight of the Cold War, born of political necessity as much as scientific aspiration. It was a project that embodied the grinding, bureaucratic reality of post-Apollo space, a giant metal tube that took forever to build. Decades, literal decades. From the first agreements in the 1980s, through the false starts Space Station Freedom, the redesigns, the near cancellations by cost-conscious Congresses, the endless technical reviews, the delicate dance of international partnership, us, Russia, Europe, Japan, Canada, each with its own agendas, budgets, and engineering philosophies. The shuttle, itself, a compromised system, born of post-Apollo budget cuts, became the fragile workhorse, its flights agonizingly spaced out by technical glitches and the catastrophic losses of Challenger and Columbia. Each module, Unity, Destiny, Columbus, Kibo, launched years apart, a disjointed Lego set assembled with robotic arms in the unforgiving void. Astronauts performed intricate, grueling spacewalks, not to plant flags or leap across new landscapes, but to connect coolant lines, install handrails, and troubleshoot bulky docking mechanisms. The science conducted within its cramped, noisy, perpetually humming modules was often incremental, esoteric, protein crystal growth, fluid dynamics in microgravity, the long-term effects of space on the human body, yielding papers in specialized journals rather than headlines. It cost hundreds of billions. It overran every schedule. It was perpetually criticized as a money pit, a jobs program for aerospace engineers, a symbol of bloated government ambition. Yet, slowly, persistently, against all odds and immense friction, it grew. It became a permanent foothold, a testament not to daring, but to sheer, stubborn persistence. A giant metal tube proof that complex, international, long-duration, human presence in space was possible, even if it felt less like exploration and more like maintaining a very expensive, very remote offshore oil platform. Beneath even this visible, if often ignored, international effort ran a deeper, darker current. Far removed from public scrutiny or scientific journals, the realm of asterisk defense contractors making a fortune, launching spy satellites nobody talked about. Asterisk, while NASA navigated budget hearings and PR challenges, companies like Lockheed Martin, builder of the Titan and Atlas rockets, and countless secret payloads, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and others thrived in the shadowy embrace of the Pentagon's black budget. The missions had names like Keyhole, Mentor, Orion code words hinting at capabilities far beyond the civilian sphere. These weren't satellites for broadcasting the World Cup. They were orbital sentinels with lenses powerful enough to read a license plate from hundreds of miles, up ears sensitive enough to pluck whispers from the electromagnetic spectrum, radar eyes piercing clouds and darkness. Their launches weren't televised spectacles. They occurred from Vandenberg Air Force Base or Cape Canaveral under heavy security, often shrouded in deliberate misinformation classified payload or occurring in the dead of night. The engineering challenges were immense: precision pointing, unprecedented resolution, secure data transmission, hardening against potential attack or space debris. The contracts were often cost-plus, guaranteeing profit regardless of overruns, and fiercely protected by national security imperatives. The value wasn't measured in stock prices or bandwidth sold, but in geopolitical advantage, monitoring arms treaties, tracking troop movements, providing real-time intelligence in conflicts from the Gulf War to the global war on terror. It was a parallel space program, orders of magnitude larger than NASA's civilian efforts in many years, operating with minimal oversight, funded by near-limitless streams of defense dollars. The engineers working on these projects lived in a different world, cleared for top-secret code word access, their work never discussed, their successes invisible, their failures buried. For the contractors, it was a golden age of quiet, dependable, highly profitable obscurity. Space wasn't a frontier here. It was the ultimate high ground for surveillance, a silent battlefield where information was the weapon. And billions flowed to those who could build the best eyes and ears. Amidst this landscape of profitable comsats, glacial station assembly, and secretive spy programs. NASA itself seemed to undergo a subtle metamorphosis, turning into something closer to a sleepy research lab. The swagger of the Apollo era. The can-do spirit of mission control in Houston during those tense lunar descents seemed to dissipate, replaced by a more cautious, bureaucratic, and academic atmosphere. The shuttle, intended as a reusable workhorse to make space access routine and affordable, became instead a complex, fragile, and astronomically expensive system that consumed the agency's budget and focus for 30 years. Its missions, after the initial thrill wore off, became operational, delivering satellites, commercial and military, conducting short-duration science missions in Spacelab modules tucked in the payload bay, launching and later servicing the Hubble Space Telescope. Itself a saga of near disaster and redemption. The astronaut corps, once comprised solely of test pilots, expanded to include scientists, engineers, and medical doctors, mission specialists, not lunar pioneers. Much of the groundbreaking research shifted to robotic probes, the Voyagers, touring the outer planets, Magellan mapping Venus, Galileo orbiting Jupiter. These were triumphs, but they unfolded over years or decades, their data analyzed by small teams of specialists, generating profound knowledge but little public heat. Headquarters in Washington became more entangled in politics, constantly justifying its existence, fighting for funding scraps, its ambitions scaled back. Centers like Ames or Glenn focused increasingly on aeronautics and fundamental research, wind tunnels, materials science, computational fluid dynamics, vital work, but lacking the visceral punch of a moonshot. The agency still employed brilliant minds, solved incredible problems, and achieved remarkable things. Hubble's, repairs, the Mars rovers, but the pace felt deliberate, careful, sometimes plotting. The overwhelming imperative was safety, risk, mitigation, process, understandable after the shuttle tragedies, but contributing to a sense of institutional caution. It felt less like an organization straining at the boundaries of the possible, and more like one managing a complex portfolio of scientific and operational projects. Its grandest dreams, a return to the moon, a trip to Mars, perpetually deferred to some future budget cycle, a future administration. The firebrands of Apollo had given way to careful stewards and tenured researchers, and so this forgotten era solidified. Space exploration wasn't dead, far from it. It was more active, more economically significant, more strategically embedded than ever before. But it had fundamentally changed character. The raw, dangerous, frontier spirit of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo had been institutionalized, commodified, and crucially, made boring on purpose. The ComSat industry needed reliability, predictability, uptime. Boring was profitable. The ISS needed international cooperation, meticulous planning, exhaustive safety protocols. Boring was sustainable and politically palatable. The defense sector needed secrecy and flawless execution. Boring was essential. NASA, scarred by tragedy and constrained by budgets, embraced process and incremental science. Boring was safe. The public fascination with space hadn't vanished entirely. Flares of interest occurred for Hubble images, Mars landings, or shuttle tragedies, but the sustained, white-hot intensity of the moon race was gone. Space had become part of the background noise of modernity, like the electricity grid or the internet backbone. Its achievements were measured in decibels of signal clarity, gigabits per second, transmitted years of continuous habitation, terabytes of surveillance data collected, or peer-reviewed papers published. The romance was sublimated into utility. The giant leaps were replaced by countless small, precise, often tedious steps. It was an era defined not by the crackle of mission control during a lunar landing, but by the persistent hum of transponders. In geosynchronous orbit, the quiet clicking of robotic arms assembling trusses, the muffled conversations in classified clean rooms, and the turning of pages in endless safety review binders. The final frontier hadn't closed. It had simply been zoned for mixed-use development, commercial, governmental, scientific, and the most successful operators were the ones who mastered the art of working quietly, efficiently, and profitably in the vast, silent dark. The forgotten era wasn't an absence. It was the necessary, unglamorous foundation upon which any future return to spectacle, if it ever came, would inevitably be built. The future of space, it turned out, belonged as much to accountants, systems engineers, and anonymous technicians as it ever did to astronauts and dreamers. The first decade of the 21st century settled over the space program like a layer of fine, bureaucratic dust. The shuttle, that complex, aging workhorse, lumbered through its final missions, resupplying the International Space Station, deploying satellites with a familiar, almost weary rumble. NASA felt becalmed. A once-daring agency now moved with the deliberate caution of a museum curator tending irreplaceable artifacts. Budgets were tight, ambitions tempered, visions of moon bases and Mars missions confined to glossy PowerPoint decks presented to disinterested congressional committees, their timelines perpetually receding into a hazy future. The grand narrative had stalled, replaced by incremental science, essential maintenance, and the quiet hum of the ISA marvel. Yes, but one orbiting in the public consciousness with all the excitement of a municipal water treatment plant. Space, for America, felt like a solved problem, or at least a problem too expensive and politically fraught to solve anew. It was infrastructure, it was managed, it was stagnant. Meanwhile, down on Earth, specifically in the sun-drenched, money-saturated enclaves of Silicon Valley, a different kind of energy was crackling. A generation of billionaires, having conquered the virtual worlds of software, e-commerce, and digital payments, found themselves restless. Their empires, Google, Amazon, PayPal, ran on code and logistics, scaling with a speed and flexibility that made traditional industries look like dinosaurs trapped in tar. They had reshaped communication, commerce, even social interaction. They looked up, and they saw not just stars, but a frontier mired in stasis, governed by inertia and hidebound institutions. The contrast was jarring. Their world moved at the speed of innovation cycles. Space moved at the speed of government procurement. They possessed fortunes vast enough to fund small nations, egos large enough to envision reshaping humanity's destiny, and a techno-optimist's conviction that any problem, even escaping Earth's gravity well, could be cracked with enough processing power, disruptive thinking, and sheer, bloody-minded will. They weren't satisfied with virtual worlds anymore. They wanted the real thing, the biggest thing, foremost among them, radiating an intensity that bordered on the unnerving. was Elon Musk, fresh from the sale of PayPal, his pockets bulging with $180 million. He didn't buy a bigger yacht or a private island. He bought books on rocket propulsion. He convened meetings with aerospace veterans, absorbing their knowledge with the frantic energy of a man possessed. His goal wasn't modest: colonize Mars, not as a vague aspiration for future generations, but as an urgent necessity, a lifeboat for humanity against existential threats he saw looming: asteroid strikes, runaway AI, self-inflicted terrestrial collapse. It sounded like science fiction, the ramblings of a delusional eccentric. But Musk possessed something beyond money: crazy eyes that masked a ferocious, almost inhuman capacity for work, a tolerance for risk that bordered on pathological, and a ruthless pragmatism disguised as visionary zeal. He didn't just dream of Mars, he reverse-engineered the path. Step 1, make spaceflight radically cheaper. Step 2, profit. Maybe Step 3, build a self-sustaining city on the red planet. He founded SpaceX in 2002, not as a hobby, but as a lifeline for the species. Silicon Valley watched, bemused. The established aerospace giants smirked, colonizing Mars with internet money. It seemed like the ultimate billionaire vanity project, destined to fizzle in a costly, embarrassing puff of smoke. Simultaneously, operating with a contrasting style that was almost stealthy, was Jeff Bezos. While Musk shouted about Mars from the rooftops, Bezos, the architect of Amazon's relentless, customer-obsessed empire, pursued space with the quiet, patient determination of a man planting a sequoia forest. He founded Blue Origin in 2000, the same year Amazon turned its first profit. But, unlike SpaceX, shrouded in secrecy, Blue Origin operated like a side project run by a particularly meticulous hobbyist. Bezos funded it personally, selling $1 billion of Amazon stock annually to feed the venture. He bought vast tracts of land in West Texas, far from prying eyes. He hired brilliant engineers, but imposed a culture of methodical, incremental progress, encapsulated in the company's tortoise logo and motto: Gradatim ferociter, step by step, ferociously. His vision was grand, but fundamentally different from Musk's. Millions of people living and working in space, not just on Mars, but in vast, rotating space colonies, envisioned by physicist Gerard O'Neill. Bezos saw access to space not as an escape hatch, but as an expansion of resources and human potential, relieving pressure on Earth. He focused not on Mars immediately, but on mastering the basics: reusable, suborbital vehicles, then orbital launch. While Musk burned cash and rhetoric with equal fervor, Bezos built his rocket garden slowly, quietly, brick by expensive brick, his gaze fixed firmly on the horizon of the next century, content to let others chase the flashy headlines. The early years of SpaceX were a brutal, public baptism by fire, or rather, by wild, spectacular explosions. The Falcon 1 ***. Their first small rocket wasn't just a failure. It was a recurring, multi-million-dollar demolition derby, broadcast to a mocking world. Flight 1, 2006. A fuel leak caused a fire mere seconds after liftoff, the rocket crumpling back onto its launch stand at Kwajalein, a tall line, a deflated party balloon. Flight to 2007 made it further, only to spin out of control due to residual thrust during stage separation, plunging into the Pacific. Flight 3, 2008. Collision between the first and second stages after separation. Each failure was dissected online. Each explosion a gif of schadenfreude for the aerospace old guard. Silicon Valley's tolerance for failing fast met the unforgiving. Physics of orbital mechanics and Physics 1. Repeatedly. Musk was down to his last rocket and almost out of money. The pressure was immense, the ridicule deafening. These weren't setbacks, they were existential crises, broadcast live. The Falcon 1 became synonymous with expensive public humiliation, proof positive that software billionaires had no business playing with rockets. The crazy eyes now held the desperate edge. The dream of Mars seemed less like a vision and more like a billionaire's tombstone inscription. This relentless, almost self-flagellating pursuit of winning, however, revealed the core driving engine beneath the billionaire space race. Private space companies weren't really about science, or even exploration for its own sake, not fundamentally. They were about winning, winning against physics, winning against the entrenched, complacent giants like United Launch Alliance. ULA, the Boeing-Lockheed joint venture that held a lucrative monopoly on U.S. government launches. Winning against the perception that space was inherently the domain of slow-moving governments. Winning against each other. Musk framed it as saving humanity, but the day-to-day was a brutal engineering brawl, a relentless focus on cost reduction, efficiency, and iterative improvement driven by a competitive fury that felt distinctly Silicon Valley. Bezos, quieter, was no less competitive. His vision demanded mastery, and mastery meant winning the technological race for reusability and reliability. They brought the Valley's core tenets to aerospace: disrupt or be disrupted. Move fast and break things, even if the things were rockets. Hardware should iterate like software. Vertically integrate. Build your own engines, your own avionics. Control your supply chain. Obsess over cost per kilogram to orbit the way Amazon obsessed over delivery times. Treat every explosion not as a catastrophe, but as a brutally expensive data point. The goal wasn't just to reach space. It was to dominate the launch market, to render the old ways obsolete, to be the platform upon which the future of space, whatever it was, would be built. Winning meant survival. Winning meant relevance. Winning meant proving the skeptics, the dinosaurs, the entire risk-averse aerospace establishment, utterly wrong, and slowly, painfully, amidst the wreckage of Falcon 1 South, a lifeline emerged from an unlikely source: NASA, the space agency, itself hamstrung by the impending retirement of the shuttle and reliant on expensive Russian Soyuz rockets to reach. The ISS faced its own crisis of capability. It needed cargo, and eventually crew, delivered to the station. The traditional contractors offered solutions that were reliable but eye-wateringly expensive, built on old, cost-plus paradigms. Desperation, or perhaps a flicker of bureaucratic daring, prompted NASA to try something radical: outsourcing. They created the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services COTS program, then Commercial Resupply Services CRS, and later Commercial Crew, instead of dictating the design. NASA set requirements: deliver X kilograms to the ISS by Y date, with C safety standards. How you did it was up to you. It was a revolutionary shift, procuring a service, not a bespoke government spacecraft. For SpaceX, clinging to survival after Falcon 1 flight finally succeeded in September 2008. The COTS contract was oxygen. NASA money funded the development of the Falcon 9 rocket and the Dragon cargo capsule. It wasn't charity. It was a bet on an unproven, chaotic newcomer. A bet that this aggressive, failure-embracing startup could deliver what the staid giants could, but cheaper, faster. It was a gamble, born of NASA's necessity, but it handed the weird new companies legitimacy, capital, and a critical customer. The impact was seismic. Asterisk, asterisk. Suddenly, space was business again. Asterisk, asterisk. Not the slow, risk-averse, cost-plus business of the defense giants, but the fast-moving, disruptive, venture-backed, winner-to-call business of Silicon Valley. SpaceX, fueled by NASA contracts and Musk's relentless drive, iterated at blinding speed. Falcon 9 evolved. Reusability moved from pipe dream to obsession. The first successful landing of a Falcon 9 first stage in December 2015 wasn't just a technical feat. It was a thunderclap, announcing a new economic reality. Rockets weren't disposable fireworks anymore. They could be refueled like airplanes. The cost curve bent dramatically. Blue Origin, though slower, achieved its own milestones, landing its new Shepard suborbital vehicle multiple times, proving the concept with Bezos's characteristic meticulousness. New players emerged. Rocket Lab with its small electron rocket, Virgin Galactic chasing suborbital tourism. Investors who once scoffed now poured billions into the sector. Launch prices plummeted, making space accessible to universities, startups, even tiny nations. The old monopoly of ULA crumbled under the competitive pressure. Satellite constellations for global internet Starlink, Project Kuiper, became viable, not just science fiction. The billionaires hadn't just built rockets. They had rewritten the economics of access to space. The stagnation was shattered. The dust was blown off. The once sleepy domain of government agencies and a handful of giant contractors became a frenetic global marketplace, buzzing with startups, venture capital, and the unrelenting pressure of competition. The roar wasn't just from rocket engines. It was the sound of a new industrial revolution igniting high above the atmosphere, fueled by silicon chips, audacious dreams, and the vast, restless fortunes of men who looked at the stars and saw not just wonder, but a market ripe for disruption. The future of space, it turned out, wouldn't be handed down from government committees. It would be launched, iterated, and sometimes exploded by private companies racing to win. The billionaires hadn't just entered the arena. They had fundamentally changed its gravity. The crackle of mission control during Apollo 11, the shared global gasp as Armstrong's boot met dust, the profound sense of collective human endeavor. It felt like a high-water mark, a moment of pure, unadulterated purpose etched onto history. Then came the long, quiet, the decades of satellites humming, space stations slowly assembling, NASA tinkering, defense contractors building unseen eyes in the sky. Space became background noise, essential but unexciting, the domain of engineers and accountants. But sometime in the late 2010s, a peculiar energy crackled back to life. Not the state-driven Cold War terror of Sputnik, nor the collective national project of Apollo. This felt different, sharper, louder, more personal. The roar wasn't just from rocket engines. It was the sound of Branson, Bezos, Musk, all racing to turn rockets into personal brand extensions. The space race had returned, not as a geopolitical contest, but as the ultimate billionaire vanity project, a high-stakes game of one-upmanship played out on launch pads and social media feeds, where the payload wasn't just satellites or supplies, but reputation, legacy, and the intoxicating aura of being the man who owned the future. It manifested in distinct, carefully cultivated styles. Elon Musk was the showman provocateur. SpaceX launches became meticulously choreographed spectacles, live streams narrated with the slick tension of a sporting event, countdowns, sync, two-pounding soundtracks, camera angles, capturing the ballet of booster landings with cinematic flair. Every successful launch, every recovered rocket, was a meme-ready victory lap against the dinosaurs of old space. Mars wasn't just a goal, it was the central pillar of the Musk mythos, the raison d'etre woven into every tweet, every presentation, filled with animations of starships swarming the red planet. Failure was public, often spectacular, but framed as a necessary step on the path to greatness, fodder for the narrative of relentless innovation. The rocket was the brand, sleek and modern, and Musk was SpaceX. Jeff Bezos, in contrast, played the long game, the quiet strategist. Blue Origin's progress was measured, shrouded in a near-obsessive secrecy that felt like a deliberate counterpoint to Musk's noise. Launches were announced sparingly. Live streams were rare and sterile. When Bezos himself finally flew on New Shepard in 2021, it was a carefully controlled, almost solemn affair, emphasizing safety and the overview effect, a stark contrast to the carnival atmosphere Musk cultivated. His vision, articulated in rare speeches, was grander, more O'Neill cylinder than Martian outpost, but delivered with the calm certainty of an Amazon earnings call. The brand was meticulous, patient, responsible. Richard Branson injected pure, unadulterated spectacle. Virgin Galactic's Spaceship Two wasn't about orbit or colonization. It was about the experience. Branson understood the theater, the white-knuckle air launch, the brief moments of weightlessness, the champagne celebration upon landing. His own flight, timed just days before Bezos, was a masterstroke of PR, positioning Virgin Galactic as the accessible, fun-loving face of space tourism. The brand was adventure, luxury, a joyride for the jet set. 3 billionaires, 3 distinct branding exercises. Musk, the visionary disruptor. Bezos, the patient builder. Branson, the experience peddler. The rockets were impressive feats of engineering, yes, but they were also billboards, physical manifestations of ego and ambition launched into the stratosphere. The most visible, and perhaps most criticized, fruit of this billionaire space race was space tourism. For decades, the dream of ordinary people reaching space felt perpetually 20 years away. Suddenly, it was here, sort of. Rich people paying millions to sit in uncomfortable chairs above the atmosphere. New Shepard offered minutes of weightlessness in a capsule likened to a minivan interior, peaking just above the Carmine line. Virgin Galactic provided a slightly longer, more roller coaster-like suborbital hop in a cabin designed more for Instagram than comfort. SpaceX upped the ante, sending wealthy civilians and sometimes carefully selected artists or athletes. On multi-day orbital jaunts in the Dragon capsule, circling the Earth for a cool tens of millions per seat. The experiences were undeniably profound for those who flew the curvature of the Earth, the black velvet of space, the overview effect, but they also highlighted the stark, uncomfortable reality of the current phase. This wasn't democratization. It was exclusivity on a cosmic scale. The seats were astronomically expensive, the accommodations cramped and utilitarian compared to terrestrial luxury, the duration fleeting. It felt less like the dawn of a new era for humanity and more like an ultra-exclusive, high-altitude country club opening its doors. A playground for the 0.001% to tick the ultimate bucket list item while the companies refined their hardware. And, crucially, generated priceless marketing footage and PR buzz. The dream sold was weightlessness and perspective. The reality delivered, for now, was a very expensive, very brief ride in a sophisticated machine, serving primarily as proof of concept and brand enhancement for the companies providing it. The romance of space travel met the reality of venture capital returns. Beneath the flashy spectacle of billionaire joyrides and Martian pronouncements, however, the real engine of the new space economy hummed with a quieter, more relentless purpose. Satellites became the real money, while tourism grabbed headlines. The low Earth orbit LEO and geostationary belts were filling up with constellations of unprecedented scale and capability. Companies like SpaceX, Starlink, Amazon Project, Kuiper, OneWeb, and a host of others weren't just launching communication satellites. They were building vast, invisible infrastructures in the sky, controlling data, GPS, internet, surveillance. This was the trillion-dollar battleground. Starlink, already numbering in the thousands, with plans for tens of thousands, aimed to blanket the globe with high-speed, low-latency internet, bypassing terrestrial cables and reaching the remotest corners and lucrative government, military contracts. The potential market was staggering, connecting ships, planes, rural communities, and entire nations. Earth observation satellites, operated by companies like Planet Labs and Maxar, provided daily higher-resolution imagery of the entire planet, sold to agriculture, insurance, intelligence agencies, and urban planners. GPS augmentation satellites increased positioning precision for everything from smartphones to autonomous vehicles. This wasn't just about broadcasting TV signals anymore. It was about building the nervous system of the 21st century, an orbital infrastructure layer controlling the flow of information, navigation, and imagery. The revenue streams were vast and diverse: subscription fees, data, licensing, government services, enterprise solutions. The rockets, developed by SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and others, were the delivery trucks. The satellites were the profitable, persistent products. The quiet empires weren't built on flags planted on distant worlds, but on terabits of data flowing through constellations owned by private corporations, controlling critical aspects of global connectivity and observation. The real power resided not in who reached Mars first, but in who owned the pipes in the sky. This burgeoning commercial activity in space didn't escape the notice of the world's most powerful military. The military's quiet obsession with who controls space intensified dramatically. Space was no longer just a benign environment for spy satellites. It was recognized as a vital, vulnerable, and contested warfighting domain, the ultimate high ground. The U.S. Space Force stood up as a separate service, a stark symbol of this shift. Their concerns were multifaceted and urgent: protecting assets, safeguarding the vast constellation of military satellites critical for communication, navigation, GPS, missile warning, and intelligence gathering from potential jamming, dazzling, or kinetic attack. Denying the enemy, developing capabilities to disrupt or destroy adversary satellites in a conflict, blinding their military and crippling their infrastructure. Space domain awareness, tracking the exponentially growing number of objects in orbit, satellites, debris, potential threats with exquisite precision. Resiliency, building constellations that are harder to kill. Diversifying launch options, embracing SpaceX and other new entrants, and exploring on-orbit servicing and manufacturing. The military watched the billionaire space race with keen interest, not for the tourism, but for the technologies. Rapid, low-cost launch, enabling quicker reconstitution of lost satellites. Advancements in satellite miniaturization and manufacturing. Potential for on-orbit refueling and repair. They became major customers. SpaceX's Starlink, proving crucial in Ukraine, and significant funders of advanced R&D. The line between commercial and military space blurred. A Starlink satellite providing internet to a village could also be part of a future military mesh network. The control of space wasn't just about profits. It was about national security supremacy in an era where warfare is increasingly networked and dependent on orbital infrastructure. The quiet empire building had profound, potentially volatile strategic implications. Amidst the noise of tourism and the quiet hum of satellite constellations, the big dreams persisted. Asterisk, asterisk, moon bases, Mars colonies, asterisk, asterisk, Musk painted vivid pictures of starship fleets carrying thousands to build a city on Mars within decades. NASA's Artemis program promised a sustainable lunar presence, a stepping stone to the red planet. Bezos spoke of future generations living in O'Neill cylinders. The rhetoric was grand, inspiring, evocative of the Apollo spirit. Yet, the reality unfolding behind the scenes was characterized by asterisk, asterisk, small, boring steps. Asterisk, asterisk, Artemis faced delays, budget overruns, and the mind-boggling complexity of developing new landers, habitats, spacesuits, and logistics chains. Starship, while achieving astonishing technical leaps with its rapid prototyping and testing, often ending in dramatic explosions that were part of the process, remained a long, long way from interplanetary colonization. The challenges were staggering and mundane: radiation shielding for long-duration flights, closed-loop life support systems that actually work for years, growing food in space, sourcing water, ice on the moon, mitigating the physiological ravages of microgravity, developing insight to resource utilization (ISRU) to make fuel and air from local materials. Solving these problems required not just flashy rocket tests, but decades of incremental research in materials science, bioengineering, power generation, and robotics. It involved painstakingly slow international negotiations, meticulous safety, certifications, and wrestling with the sheer grinding difficulty of keeping humans alive in the most hostile environment imaginable. The gap between the inspirational vision and the daily reality of engineers wrestling with cryogenic fuel slosh, software bugs in docking systems, or the toxicity of lunar dust was vast. The path to permanent off-world presence wasn't paved with heroic leaps, but with countless small, unglamorous, often frustrating technical and bureaucratic steps. The boring work was the essential foundation if the big dreams were ever to become more than just billionaire promises or government PowerPoints. And so, we find ourselves orbiting a strange new reality. Space exploration didn't disappear. It didn't fade away after Apollo. Instead, it underwent a profound metamorphosis, shedding its skin as a purely national, flag-planting, hero-making endeavor. The roar returned, yes, amplified by billionaire egos and viral marketing campaigns. The spectacle is back, in the form of tourist hops and booster landings. But the deeper, more enduring shift is quieter, more pervasive. Space has become another quiet business empire. Its foundations are poured in the concrete of satellite constellations, beaming data and internet, generating billions in revenue and wielding immense, often unseen, influence over daily life and global security. Its walls are built by the relentless logistics of launch providers focused on cost and cadence, turning access to orbit into a commodity. Its rulers are not just nations, but corporations wielding unprecedented power over critical orbital infrastructure, and billionaires shaping its future direction according to their personal visions and competitive drives. The military lurks in the shadows, acutely aware the control of this domain is existential. The grand dreams of moon bases and Mars colonies persist, but their realization depends entirely on mastering the unglamorous, incremental, and often boring realities of sustained operation in a brutal environment. The flags planted on the moon were symbols of a specific moment, a specific kind of national triumph. The heroes of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo belonged to an era defined by Cold War urgency and state power. The new space age isn't devoid of heroism. The engineers solving impossible problems, the astronauts enduring long ISS missions, the technicians ensuring a flawless launch, but their stories rarely capture the collective imagination. Like Armstrong's step, the triumphs are measured in bandwidth delivered, launch costs reduced, orbits cleared of debris, satellites flawlessly deployed, quarterly earnings met. It's an empire built on fiber optic cables in the sky, on reusable rocket economics, on data streams and surveillance capabilities, on the patient accumulation of technological competence and operational experience. It's driven as much by shareholder value, market dominance, and strategic advantage as by the spirit of exploration. The romance of the void hasn't vanished, but it's increasingly mediated by corporate logos, subscription fees, and the quiet, relentless logic of business. The final frontier, it turns out, wasn't immune to the forces that shape our terrestrial world. It was simply the next territory to be mapped, exploited, and ultimately integrated into the vast, complex, and often quietly ruthless machinery of human enterprise. The space race didn't end. It just learned to wear a suit and tie, carry a spreadsheet, and build empires, not of flags, but of data and dollars, high above the silent earth. And now, as this story slowly drifts into the distance, like the last pages of a great book closing, You don't have to hold on to anything anymore. The weight of the world, the noise of the day, it's all somewhere far behind you. Now, you've made it here, to this quiet place where nothing is urgent and everything is soft. Out there, the world keeps spinning, but here, you've stepped outside of time, just floating, just resting, just you and the steady rhythm of breath carrying you deeper. You don't need to finish the story. Sleep will finish it for you. And you don't need to stay awake for that. Good night.